Thailand's revered monarchy is facing calls for change from thousands protesting on the streets of the country. In particular focus is the current king, Maha Vajiralongkorn, whose long periods of stay here in Germany have raised questions not just among his people, but also in the German parliament. Here's more.
The protest movement in Thailand is picking up momentum. Protesters are calling for constitutional change and want to reform Thailand's powerful monarchy.
People want to really go to the roots of their grievances. They want systemic changes. And when they look, and these protesters are very analytic. And when they look to the root causes of that problem, they see these regime compositions as the cause of that problem. And I think the palace is one of these.
Thailand's King Maha Vajiralongkorn has a strong influence on most aspects of Thai society and has tried to consolidate his power. He is known and often criticized for his lavish lifestyle. But instead of ruling from his royal residence in Bangkok, the king prefers to spend his time thousands of kilometers away in Germany. This hotel in a Bavarian resort town is where he normally stays for long stretches of time. His presence in southern Germany has been a tabloid sensation. But it has also drawn strong criticism from Thai activists, including Junya Yimpraset, who fled Thailand and lives in Europe since 2010.
The Thai people are getting more angry because he is not here just a tourist and stop intervening in the Thai politics, but he is here using German's locations and continue continue to influence.
She has organized a series of protests across Germany to raise awareness and push for change in Thailand, like shining slogans against the king on his favorite hotel. Yimpraset thinks the king shouldn't be acting as head of state from a foreign country. Germany's government appears to agree. We have made it clear that politics concerning Thailand is not to be done from German soil. On top of that, there are many bizarre reports about what is happening there. We would always oppose having guests in our country who run their state affairs from here. But the German government hasn't announced any specific measures. Junya Yimpraset sent a letter to the German chancellor and other leaders to urge the government to act. The king has now returned to Thailand for the first time in almost 6 months and is expected to stay for a few weeks. Protesters have vowed to continue demonstrating despite a crackdown. Things are not getting easier for King Vajiralongkorn.
And joining me now is Praveen Chachaval Pongpan, Associate Professor at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Kyoto University and himself living in exile in Japan. Praveen, welcome. Why do you think the King of Thailand spends so much time in Germany?
Well, I guess there's a number of reasons. As I heard, no one know quite sure. I think the first one is for the medical reason that he need to consult with regular doctors, in Germany. Second one, I guess this is about his personal lifestyle. I think he is a kind of a king who, have some sort of eccentric behavior or character that residing in Bangkok, he would be put too much under the spotlight of the local media. So being away from home, especially in Germany, he can be away from the Thai press and he can behave, as he wished. And I think he purposefully picked Bavaria because it is not a big, cosmopolitan. In many ways, it can be away, from the last crown.
Right. Praveen, we are of course talking about the head of a monarchy that is very revered by Thais. But now this monarchy has suddenly become one of the focal points of protests in Thailand. How has that happened?
Well, I guess that when people think about King Rama X, the current king, or King Vajiralongkorn, you can't help but have to compare him with his father, the much revered King Bhumibol Adulyadej. And exactly because of the opposite characteristic of the two kings, which the previous one having earned a kind of moral authority, whereas the current one having lack of such quality. So people could see this stark difference between the two kings. And on top of that, we're talking about him staying long term in Germany. I think a lot of Thai people felt that the king more or less is not responsible. The king has left the people unattended, especially during this time of difficulties, when the world and including Thailand having to go through COVID-19. So because of this factor, combined, that sort of push or motivate the people to come out on the street to protest against the king.
Praveen, you are a Thai dissident who's living in exile in Japan, but there are many Thais who are still fervent supporters of the monarchy. I'm wondering how that support squares with the criticisms that you have just leveled.
Well, yes, I mean the Thai political landscape had long been divided, and I think the political fault line has been drawn around the monarchy at least since 2016 political crisis that witnessed the overthrowing of the government of Thaksin Shinawatra. I think from that point onward, Thai society had become so divided. Either you are royalist or you are not royalist. Obviously, whatever I said, especially my critical standpoint vis-a-vis the monarchy would be rejected by the royalists. But I understand that this group of royalists they are shrinking in terms of quantity simply because of the younger generation. You can see them coming out on the street now. This younger generation, they are quite lucky, to be able to escape long year of propaganda under the previous regime. So that's why they have no sort of recollection of the greatness of the previous king. And that's why they become so courageous, to come out to protest.
And speaking of this younger generation, they are also demanding constitutional reform and that current Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha step down. What is the connection between these demands and reform of the monarchy?
Well, I mean, it's inseparable. Talking about the political reform in general, you have to include the reform of the monarchy, considering that the monarchy is in fact the source of the problems in Thailand. So that's why I think at the beginning the student touched upon the government, meaning that to push to call for Prayut to step down, but now they move on to attack the monarchy instead because they know that talking about the monarchy would also cover everything else in Thai politics.
Right. The way the protests are going and given the government response to it so far, do you think the protesters' demands will ultimately be accepted by the government?
No, I don't think so. You can see the way in which the government has handled the protest from day one. They have shown no sign of compromise. And I'm talking about just the government first. That's why they continue to arrest core leaders. And you could see that on Wednesday night, they started crackdown on the protester too. Now, talking about the monarchy also, we have seen no sign from King Vajiralongkorn to be able to negotiate with the reform. In fact, he has remained silent. And I'm afraid the silence is basically the answer to the reform.
We'll leave it there for the time being. But thank you so much for joining us. Praveen Chachaval Pongpan.